You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. There will be famines, there will be disease, and the world will feel like it's shaking. That's not a modern commentator talking, that's Jesus in Matthew 24 describing the kind of cascading breakdown that makes people ask, is this it? And then Revelation takes that same tension and turns it into one of the most unforgettable images in all of Scripture. Four riders galloping across history like a countdown. The Four Horsemen. But here's what most people miss. Revelation isn't just throwing spooky symbols at you to scare you into religion. John is encoding a pattern, a collapse sequence so consistent that historians recognize it, economists can measure it, and public health researchers can map it. Conquest, war, famine, death. Not as random disasters, but as a chain reaction. In this video, I'm going to lay out 9 evidence-based data points, walk you through the hidden Old Testament passages that Revelation is quietly quoting, and show you the Greek details that change what many people think the white horse even represents. And by the end, there's one bonus connection that ties all 4 riders into a single unified warning, a warning that feels ancient and uncomfortably current. Let's start with something concrete and testable, the sequence itself. In modern research on state failure and mass mortality, you repeatedly see a grim progression. First comes coercive expansion, conquest, takeover, domination, whether by armies or by systems. Then the violence multiplies and spreads. Then the food system breaks, sometimes slowly, often suddenly, usually with price shocks before empty shelves. And after that, death accelerates, not only from bullets and bombs, but from disease, exposure, and the collapse of basic medical infrastructure. That chain isn't a theological opinion. It's a pattern that shows up across disciplines. Political scientists have argued for decades about what triggers conflict, but a recurring theme in peer-reviewed work is that shocks, economic, environmental, and political, raise risk when institutions can't absorb pressure. For example, a widely discussed study by Marshall Burke and colleagues in PNAS in 2009 argued that warming correlated with increased civil war risk in certain African contexts. That paper has been debated and refined by later research, and that's exactly the point. Serious scholars argue over mechanisms, but what they don't argue over is that destabilizing shocks plus weak institutions can cascade into violence. Then look at food. In 2013, Cullen Hendricks and Henk-Jan Brinkman reviewed evidence in the Journal of Peace Research connecting food, insecurity, and conflict dynamics. Their core takeaway is not sensational, it's practical. When staple prices spike, when wages can't keep up, when families can't buy basic calories, unrest becomes more likely, recruitment into violent groups becomes easier, and governments lose legitimacy. People can tolerate fear longer than they can tolerate hunger. Now add public health. When conflict and displacement rise, disease risk rises. That's not propaganda, it's epidemiology. Research on emerging infections, like the influential 2008 Nature paper by Kate Jones and colleagues mapping global trends, shows outbreaks are often linked to ecological disruption, human mobility, and stressed health systems. And war does all 3 at once. It moves huge populations quickly, shatters sanitation, interrupts vaccinations, and collapses clinics. So when Revelation introduces 4 riders in a specific order, conquest, war, famine, and then death by multiple causes, it's not just painting horror. It's describing a convergence of forces that, in the real world, routinely travel together. And Revelation gets even more specific because John doesn't just say, then there was famine. He gives you numbers. In Revelation 6, the 3rd rider brings a voice announcing prices: a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. A denarius, in the Roman world, was commonly understood as about a day's wage for a laborer, and the Greek term for the measure, choinix, points to a small daily ration. In other words, John is describing an economy where a person works all day and can barely buy enough grain to survive for one day. That's not vague symbolism. That's what a cost of living catastrophe looks like at street level. This is why the Four Horsemen hit people so hard. They don't feel like fantasy. They feel like the moment you realize the paycheck can't buy groceries anymore. The hospitals are overwhelmed, the streets are dangerous, and nobody in charge is telling the truth. Now, before we even touch the mystery side, notice what John is doing as a writer. He's compressing complex social collapse into four unforgettable icons. That's not anti-scientific. It's the kind of pattern recognition humans have always used to survive. But John isn't merely observing. He's interpreting. He's saying these aren't just accidents. They're moral exposures. They reveal what happens when human power is unleashed without righteousness. So let's read the writers carefully, because the hidden prophecy behind each one isn't merely bad things happen. It's that each writer represents a specific mechanism, something that pushes history toward breakdown. The first seal opens, and John sees a white horse. The rider has a bow. A crown is given to him, and he goes out conquering and to conquer. The details matter. The crown in Greek is stephanos, often associated with victory. A wreath, an honor awarded, not necessarily a royal diadem. That nuance matters because it frames the rider less like a rightful king and more like a successful conqueror. And he carries a bow, which is not the standard iconic weapon of Roman infantry. In the first century imagination, the feared bowmen were the mounted archers of the East, especially the Parthians, Rome's rival power that humiliated Roman armies and haunted Roman pride. You don't have to claim John is doing a one-to-one Parthians equal white horse equation to see the effect. A rider with a bow evokes distant threat, coercive expansion, and the dread of an enemy you can't easily stop. So why is the horse white? In Scripture and in Revelation, white can symbolize purity, victory, and heavenly vindication. But in apocalyptic writing, symbols can also be weaponized ironically. White can be the color of a counterfeit righteousness, conquest dressed up as salvation. Later in Revelation, Christ rides a white horse, and that fact has created a long debate. Is the first rider Christ, the gospel, or conquest? Here's what can be said without hype. The text defines this rider by conquest. He isn't described as healing, teaching, saving, or being worshipped. He is described as conquering, and Revelation later distinguishes Christ sharply with different imagery and a different moment in the story. The first rider appears at the beginning of the unraveling. The rider on the white horse in Revelation 19 appears at the culmination of judgment and justice. The similarity of color is not enough to collapse them into the same figure. So what's the hidden prophecy behind Rider 1? Conquest is often the first seal of collapse. Not necessarily because armies cross borders first, but because domination becomes normal. The first horseman can represent the beginning of coercion. The moment power receives permission to expand, to override conscience, to absorb truth into propaganda. Notice the passive voice. A crown was given to him. Authority is permitted. Systems don't fall only because evil exists. They fall because evil becomes authorized. Then the second seal opens, and a red horse appears. The rider is permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he is given a great sword. This is the moment many people imagine when they think apocalypse, open violence. But Revelation's wording is sharper than "there was war." Peace is taken. Something is removed, like a lid coming off. And the killing isn't framed only as organized battle between uniformed armies. It's people slaying one another. That includes civil fracture, neighbors, factions, mobs, militias, betrayals. When peace is removed, violence doesn't stay on a battlefield. It spreads through social relationships. Modern conflict research often describes violence as self-reinforcing. Retaliation cycles, arms availability, grievance narratives, and fear can create feedback loops where violence becomes the only language left. Revelation captured that dynamic long before anyone drew it as a systems diagram. Then the third seal opens and John sees a black horse. The rider holds scales in his hand, and again a voice announces prices: wheat and barley for a denarius. This is famine, but it's famine expressed as economics. Measurement, rationing, pricing, scarcity managed by calculation. And then comes a line that sounds like a riddle. Do not harm the oil and the wine. Why would oil and wine be protected while grain becomes unaffordable? One strong interpretive angle is inequality. Grain is the staple. Oil and wine can function as trade goods and cultural markers of abundance. John may be describing a world where the essentials are scarce and crushingly expensive, but certain goods still flow, especially those associated with wealth, land ownership, and elite stability. In modern terms, the poor are rationing calories while the insulated still sip comforts. The injustice is not subtle. Another angle some scholars discuss is agricultural realism. Olive trees and vineyards are longer-term assets. Grain fields can be burned in a season. Olive groves and vineyards represent multi-year investments that conquerors might preserve to extract ongoing profit. That too would fit the logic of conquest. Don't destroy what you can monetize. Let people starve on bread while you protect the commodities that keep the system profitable. Hidden prophecy behind Rider 3 is the part people underestimate. Famine isn't only a natural disaster, it's often a social event. It's scarcity plus distribution failure plus moral failure. A famine can be accelerated by hoarding, corruption, price gouging, and warfare. Revelation depicts famine as something you can measure with a scale because it's tied to controlled access. Then the fourth seal opens, and John sees a pale horse. The Greek word is chloros, greenish, sickly, the color of something drained of life. The rider's name is Death, and Hades follows him. This is not merely death as an event, it's death as a power, with the grave gathering behind it. And then Revelation lists the causes: sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts of the earth. This is where the passage becomes unexpectedly modern in the way it bundles risks. Death comes by violence, by hunger, by disease, and by what happens when the boundary between human order and the wild breaks down. That wild beasts line is not decorative. In collapsed societies, wildlife encroachment and human encroachment collide. Predation increases. Livestock and wild animals mix. People hunt what they never hunted before. Trade networks shift. Displacement pushes humans into marginal spaces. From a public health perspective, this is exactly the kind of chaos that can increase zoonotic spillover risk, diseases that move from animals into humans, one of the most studied themes in emerging infectious disease research. So the fourth rider isn't only a corpse color symbol, he's a convergence. He's what happens when multiple risk factors synchronize. Violence plus hunger plus disease plus ecological disruption. In modern language, you could call it a syndemic, interacting crises that multiply harm. Now here's the hidden key that proves John didn't invent these four riders out of thin air. Revelation is quoting older scripture, not with quotation marks, but with structure. Ezekiel 14:21 contains a line that is almost like a blueprint. God speaks of his four severe judgments: sword, famine, wild beasts, and pestilence. That is the exact fourfold set that Revelation assigns to death in the fourth seal, which means the horsemen aren't random. John is deliberately pulling covenant judgment language from the Hebrew prophets and reapplying it to his audience's world. That doesn't mean every famine is God zapping people. It means the prophets saw something consistent. When societies embrace injustice and violence and idolatry, the consequences often arrive in a recognizable cluster. Scripture isn't embarrassed to say moral collapse and social collapse are connected. And if you want another hidden layer, go to Zechariah. In Zechariah's visions, horses appear as agents moving through the earth, reporting and patrolling, representing God's awareness of nations. Revelation takes the horse imagery and shifts it into the unsealing of history itself, less like a patrol report and more like a judgment sequence. Same symbolic vocabulary, intensified. Even the number 4 carries meaning. In biblical symbolism, 4 often points to the earthward scope, the 4 winds, the 4 corners. The horsemen are not saying one village has a bad day. They're saying the forces described here can sweep across the whole inhabited world. Now we need to deal honestly with skepticism, because a thinking skeptic will ask, isn't Revelation just coded political protest against Rome? And if it is, doesn't that make the prophecy angle exaggerated? It's true that Revelation is loaded with critique of imperial power. Many scholars argue convincingly that John is challenging Roman claims of peace, security, and divine authority, but that doesn't cancel prophecy. Biblical prophecy frequently has what you might call layered horizons. It speaks into a specific historical moment, while revealing patterns that recur. Empires change names. The moral logic stays. If Revelation critiques Rome, then the Four Horsemen still function as prophecy in the strongest sense. They reveal what empire reliably produces. Conquest produces war. War produces scarcity. Scarcity produces mass death. That is not limited to Rome. It's the anatomy of oppression. Another skeptical objection is that the symbols are too broad. Any era can claim them. But Revelation 6 isn't simply bad things happen. It includes a wage-to-food ratio. It includes ration measures. It includes a multi-cause model of death, and it includes a fraction, authority over a fourth of the earth, which signals measured limitation rather than total annihilation. That's not the language of a random fortune cookie. It's the language of a writer who wants you to see mechanisms, not just mood. A third objection is philosophical. Science explains war and famine and disease, so why bring God into it? Because mechanism and meaning are not the same category. Science can explain how a pathogen spreads through disrupted sanitation. Science can model how price shocks correlate with unrest. Science can map how displacement increases mortality. Revelation is asking what kind of world we are building where those mechanisms become catastrophic, what we worship, what we excuse, what we normalize, and what we do to the vulnerable when systems are stressed. Revelation doesn't compete with science. It moralizes the data. It says the universe is not indifferent to injustice, and history is not a story where power gets the final word. Now let's tackle the most controversial debate carefully: the white horse. Some Christians sincerely believe the first rider is Christ or the gospel, because Christ later appears on a white horse. If you hold that view, I'm not here to mock it. But the internal contrasts are significant. In Revelation 6, the rider carries a bow and receives a stephanos. In Revelation 19, Christ's imagery centers on truth, judgment, and a sword proceeding from his mouth, and he bears many diadems, royal authority. In Revelation 6, the rider's coming launches the sequence of calamities. In Revelation 19, Christ's coming ends the rebellion of evil and establishes justice. Even if someone still reads the first rider positively, it remains clear the text frames him as conquest. And if conquest is the beginning of the unraveling, that should make every reader cautious about any conquest that looks righteous just because it rides in on a white horse. That is one of Revelation's most uncomfortable warnings. Deception doesn't always come in obvious darkness. Sometimes it comes in a color that looks like purity, carrying a crown that looks like legitimacy, claiming victory as if victory itself were proof of goodness. Now, once you see the horseman as a collapse chain, Revelation starts confronting you personally. Because the point is not to obsess over timelines. The point is to ask what you cling to. The horsemen expose fragile idols. If your security is built on permanent stability, on the assumption that markets always work, hospitals always function, food always arrives, peace always holds, Revelation says those things can be unsealed. And when they are, the world shows what it truly values. The horsemen also expose moral contagion. The red horse doesn't merely represent those bad people over there. It represents what happens when a society accepts dehumanization as normal, when contempt becomes entertainment, when lies become currency, when fear becomes policy. Peace gets taken, and suddenly people are slaying one another, not only with weapons, but with betrayal, exploitation, and cold indifference. And then, the horsemen force what might be the central question of the entire book. What does it mean that the seals are opened by the Lamb? Revelation does not show history being controlled by a thug in the sky. It shows history in the hands of the slain and risen Christ. The Lamb is the only one worthy to open the scroll, which means God's authority is not arbitrary power. It is cruciform authority, authority revealed through self-giving love and justice. That doesn't erase the terror of judgment. It reframes it. Judgment is not God having a tantrum. Judgment is God refusing to lie about what evil does. It's the exposure of consequences and the refusal to let oppression masquerade as peace forever. So, what is the hidden prophecy behind each rider? Stated plainly, the white horse warns that conquest can come wearing the color of righteousness, power that expands, wins, and claims legitimacy, often with propaganda and coercion. The red horse warns that when conquest destabilizes society, peace can be removed and violence spreads into the fabric of everyday life. The Black Horse warns that famine is not only empty fields, it's economic suffocation, rationing, inflation, and unjust distribution where a day's wage can't buy a day's bread. And the Pale Horse warns that death is rarely a single cause. It is a convergence: violence, hunger, disease, and the unraveling of the boundary between civilization and chaos. And here's the bonus connection that ties all four together. The Four Horsemen function like an anti-Exodus. In Exodus, God breaks an oppressive empire to liberate the enslaved. In Revelation, the horsemen reveal what happens when the world keeps rebuilding Egypt again and again, until oppression becomes normalized on a global scale. The riders are what it looks like when humans create a world so unjust that the only thing left is unraveling. So what do you do with this? If you're a Christian, the application is not panic. The application is endure with truth. Revelation consistently calls believers to patient endurance, to faithful witness, to refusing the lies of empire even when it's costly. It's not a book written to create conspiracy addicts. It's written to form resilient saints. If you're a skeptic, the challenge is not pretend you love symbolism. The challenge is to notice how morally serious this text is. It doesn't flatter humanity. It doesn't say progress is inevitable. It says systems break in predictable ways when power is worshipped. And whether you call that sin or human nature, it's a diagnosis worth taking seriously. And if you're somewhere in the middle, drawn to evidence but hungry for meaning, Revelation offers a category many modern people lost: that history can be intelligible without being simplistic, and that moral reality is as real as material mechanism. Let me land this with a tight recap. First, the horsemen reflect a collapse sequence, recognized across disciplines: coercive takeover, then violence, then food system breakdown with price shocks, then mass death through multiple interacting causes. Second, Revelation 6 encodes famine not as vague doom, but as economics: a day's wage for a daily ration. Third, the fourth rider's list: sword, famine, pestilence, wild beasts, matches Ezekiel's 4 severe judgments, proving the horsemen are rooted in older biblical covenant language. Fourth, the Greek details matter: stephanos as victory wreath legitimacy, chloros as corpse-sick color, and the repeated was given language emphasizing permitted and limited authority rather than chaos. Fifth, the horsemen are less about predicting a single date and more about exposing the moral anatomy of collapse, then calling the reader to choose what kind of conquest they will serve: the conquest of domination or the victory of the Lamb. So here's my question for you. When you read Revelation now, do you see random monsters? Or do you see a warning written in symbols because the truth is too heavy to say plainly? Mind blown? Comment what hit hardest: the wage to bread detail, the Ezekiel connection, or the way wild beasts suddenly sounds like ecological disruption and disease spillover. If this changed how you read Revelation 6, like the video, subscribe for more deep dives at the faith-science intersection, and share this with someone who thinks Revelation is either pure superstition or only a headline generator. And one more thing to carry with you. The horsemen are terrifying, yes, but they are not the final word. The Lamb is. And Revelation's ultimate message is not that darkness rides faster than God. It's that even when the world unravels, Christ still calls people to truth, courage, and a kind of faithfulness that outlasts empires.